Please be seated. The Royal Commission will now resume.
I'll give you a call.
Mr. Ehlers from Dunedin, the video link. Can you hear me, Mr. Ehlers?
Yes, I can.
Your name is David Ehlers. Have you got a middle name?
Joseph. David Joseph Ehlers.
Thank you. And you are a solicitor residing in Dunedin?
Yes, I am.
And are you one of the owners, or one of the shareholders, perhaps to be more correct, in a company that owns or owned a building that was at 617 to 625 Colombo Street?
Yes, that's correct.
And the company, I think, is called Best Little Law House Limited?
It's the Best Little Law House Limited.
The Best.
There you go.
Thank you. And I think there's a number of shareholders and you're one of them?
Yes, that's correct.
A group of lawyers, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
How long have you owned, or had you owned the building prior to September last year?
I think it was approximately 5 years.
Right. And in that time, prior to September, had you effected any structural strengthening as owners, or not?
No, we haven't. I think you're aware that there was some strengthening of the building done by a previous owner.
Right, and we've heard that was in 1994 and then stage 2 in the year 2000?
I wasn't sure. I'm aware of the 1994 alterations, but I wasn't aware of the 2000 alterations.
Okay.
I think there was some tenancy work done from time to time, but that's... I wasn't aware that it was another strengthening exercise.
All right. Prior to the September earthquake, were you aware of the Christchurch City Council's earthquake-prone policy?
No, I wasn't. I was aware that they had a policy, but not the detail of the policy.
Okay. And you weren't aware of how it applied to that building that you owned?
No, I mean, we hadn't had any contact with them or any reference to it.
All right. Do I take it from that then that you didn't have any understanding of whether your building was earthquake prone or not, as under the Building Act?
Well, I knew that it was obviously an older building. I knew that there had been some strengthening work done, but by general knowledge, I was aware that it's obviously not as good as a brand new building.
Okay. We've heard from Mr. McCarthy from the council a short time ago, and he referred to the earthquake strengthening that had been done prior to 2000, and then to legislative changes in 2005, which would have meant that the strengthening work that had been done, because of the increase, if you like, in the levels of requirement, would mean that the building was likely earthquake prone, but you weren't aware of that, or the particulars of that?
Well, not of the particulars. I mean, I had assumed that if we were going to carry out any structural work on the building, then we may have had some strengthening or upgrading work to be carried out, if that was the case. I mean, I'm aware of that from general knowledge of buildings down here and the like.
All right. Mr. McCarthy referred to, from the council records, a proposal for a new kitchen facility in 2009. That's presumably in one of the tenancies. Were you aware of that?
That would have been, yes, that was probably the Silk Road tenancy.
Right. And he said that because the value of the work was less than 25% of the value of the building, it didn't require structural or strengthening work to be completed. Were you aware of that or not? Just
to explain and I'm trying to recall, the building was managed by Colliers, and any correspondence or with council was really done by them. I'm just trying to recall, in terms of that tenancy, the tenant was largely driving it. I think we had some involvement in doing that work.
Okay.
Around that work, I can't recall now who lodged the consent even, quite honestly.
All right.
Mr. Reefer, forgive me, Mr. Ehlers, but I've just been handed a note by the registrar to remind me that you haven't been sworn in.
Oh, sorry, sir.
So we'd better attend to that. Can I just ask you to make an affirmation, Mr. Ehlers?
I've actually brought a Bible.
You have? All right. Well,
I thought that may be of assistance.
Yes, thank you. Well, do you promise that the evidence that you will give to this commission will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do, sir.
And do you also swear that that is the case in respect of the evidence that you have already given?
That is correct, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ehlers, I think you said in a reply to the Commission, a letter from the Commission, that the heritage status of the building had been lifted some years ago. Was that your understanding?
That was my understanding, yes.
Right, because the Council, Mr. McCarthy from the Council wasn't sure of that, but is that something that was done in the time you owned the building?
My recollection is that I think shortly before we purchased the building, there was a status on the facade, but it had been lifted prior to our purchasing the building.
Okay. Now, I want to ask you about events after the September earthquake. We've heard evidence from two witnesses from the structural engineering firm Becker Carter, that they were asked by the owners via Colliers to inspect the building after the September earthquake. You're aware of that?
Yes, I am. Yep.
And that they did so, and they completed some what are called rapid assessment forms. The building, we've heard, had been green placarded by council overseen inspections shortly after the earthquake, but that Beck had completed a fairly detailed structural assessment of the building that culminated in a report of 10 December 2010. You've had a copy of that?
Yes, I have.
Can I ask you, firstly, in accepting that you're not an engineer but a lawyer, but as a non-engineer but owner of the building, what did you conclude in general terms from that report?
Largely that the building was withstood the earthquake reasonably well for its age. I was aware that there was some cracking in 625, and that we were in time going to have to get some further assessments of what work actually needed to be done to bring the building, well, to get it right again. But that at that point in time, the building was fine to be occupied, and that there wasn't any immediate danger to any of its occupants or others.
Right. So I've referred the Mr. Barnett from Becker to a paragraph in the executive summary where it said the buildings do not pose an immediate risk to their occupants. However, repairs will be required to the damaged walls and to prevent further collapse of the masonry parapets. That was in the executive summary. Do you recall reading that?
Yes. Yes, I do.
Right. And Mr. Barnett also was referred to paragraph 7.2 of the report, 7.1 and 7.2. And in 7.2, the Becker had referred to structural damage and repairs that were required. Do you recall that? You've got it in front of you, I think, haven't you?
Yes, repairs to reinforced concrete block walls, etc.
Yes, if you look at 7.2, the paragraph that starts as mentioned above, under structural damage, 7.2.
Yes, yep.
it says, as mentioned above, when the repairs to the current damage listed below are carried out, the building will still not comply with the current council's policy requirements for lateral load capacity. Did you understand that the council's then requirements had been increased following the September earthquake?
I understood subsequently that there were changes, and I wasn't absolutely clear what those changes were. My understanding is that there was some discussion at one point of time where council was saying it would go to 66% of current code, and then in February, in days before the February earthquake, and when the insurance assessors said, well, we can now get on and start to look at the repairs on this building, I was told that they were back at 33%. So there was some. It wasn't a clear statement, but I understood that immediately following the earthquake, naturally they were going to be saying, well, we need to be looking pretty closely at what we're doing.
All right. And the next sentence says, some repairs are essential to ensure the operation and immediate safety of the buildings and their occupants, so should be carried out as soon as possible. See that sentence?
Yes.
What did you understand by that?
There was some cracking around. I think the major concern was around 143 Churm Street, around the parapets on 143 Churm Street. There was some cracking there, and in fact we and it may still be there. We undertook some temporary repairs to secure the corners of that building.
Right.
The other repairs that were done were repairs on the Silk Road building to get that back operational. And my understanding is that council were quite happy with those repairs.
The council or Becca? Were Becca involved or not?
As I understand, sorry?
Were Becca involved in overseeing that or not?
I can't recall.
Okay.
Not specifically at that point in time. I don't think they weren't structural repairs as such.
Right.
The position was that we were still trying to get assessments out of the insurance assessors, and we would, in terms of getting approval to go ahead and price and have designs done, we were still waiting on those clearances.
Right. Well, I was going to ask you about that. So, if you look below where I was getting you to read, to look at that sentence, 7.2.1, point 2, point 3 and point 4, they list the areas of damage that they're referring to, correct?
Yep.
So, apart from the parapet damage which you mentioned had been repaired, had the others been repaired or not?
No, they hadn't.
Right. All right. And
there was some minor repairs to 625 that were carried out to comply with health and safety requirements.
Okay, but the structural matters set out there hadn't been?
No, not at that point, no.
But you mentioned before that you'd started to progress that with the insurance. Just tell us about that process.
Well, the building was insured with Western Pacific,
right,
as you'll be aware. And we had lodged claims, given them the insurance, the engineers' reports, and wanted to progress those matters. But in hindsight, perhaps the reason why they weren't rushing to do some of these things may have been monetary. But we were very much in their hands as to what we could do and what we couldn't do. In fact, at one point in time, we were told by Western Pacific to stop getting engineering reports and not to get any further reports without their authority, express authority.
Was that in relation to this building?
Yes.
Right.
That's the only building we've got there. When I talk about the building, I talk about the complex of 3 buildings.
Right. And when you read that sentence, the bottom of page 26 under 7.2, to ensure the operation and immediate safety of the buildings and their occupants, did you consider that had to be done as soon as possible?
Well, if you go to the beginning of the report where it says that the building was safe for occupants and could be reoccupied, then in terms of an immediate, should I do it tomorrow? No, I didn't think that was the case at all.
Right. So you thought they had to be done at some stage, but there was nothing to worry about at that stage.
There was no immediate urgency. We undertook the parapet repairs that have been identified as being urgent and put those in place. The rest was a case of, well, obviously there'd been a significant earthquake and there were a lot of people trying to get things done, and it wasn't straightforward to get things done. We simply undertook, as I said, some of those works, those urgent, what we regarded as the urgent works, without really getting the authority of the insurers, and simply did those. But in terms of a detailed assessment of the total building and going through it and identifying all the issues that needed to be dealt with, no, we hadn't been able to get to that point. And as I said, it was 3 days before the February earthquake that they came to us and said, well, we can now get started on this.
Right. And in the report, Becca also recommend getting a more detailed engineering evaluation to look at structural strengthening. You presumably hadn't started that or thought about that at that stage?
No.
Okay. So just finally, after receiving the report and digesting it in December, what was your understanding as an owner and a landlord as to the safety of people in or around the buildings in that post-September period?
My understanding was that the building didn't pose an immediate threat to anyone.